And I'm a real alcoholic. We are on top of page 20, first paragraph in, and we're starting to talk about the solution. And you notice that every Sunday I introduce myself as a real alcoholic. Next couple pages, you're going to understand why. Okay? And the second paragraph down, we're going to find out the third purpose for the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. So let's go ahead and get into the book. Page 20, first paragraph down.
For you filthy ones, our very lives, as ex-problem drinkers, depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs.
Okay, here we go.
You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us become so very ill from drinking. Doubtless, you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically.
There is a third purpose of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, to answer such questions specifically. What do I have to do in order to get over it? And that's what this book does.
We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. Moderate drinkers.
Now here we are going to list 4 types of drinkers. We're going to talk about the moderate drinker first. And we're going to talk about a hard drinker. A hard drinker has not developed the obsession. And the obsession is what sets the alcoholic aside. That obsession of the mind. And this obsession of the mind is the ability of our mind to make us believe a lie. And the alcoholic lie is always the same. And it pretty much goes something like this. This time, it'll be different. 15 years of alcoholic drinking behind me. Knowing exactly what happens to me when I pick up a drink. Knowing that I am going to go to jail, I'm going to get in a fight, that I'm going to do something that I don't like to do, and then I got to come home the next day and call up my friends and find out if I had a good time or not. This time, it'll be different. And that's what the alcoholic, the obsession, will do for us. Knowing what our track record is, and having that thought go through our head and buying it. Buying it hook, line, and sinker. The obsession of the disease of alcoholism is what the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is designed to help us deal with. But that is what creates the alcoholic. But the hard drinker has not developed the obsession yet. And in AA, we have an abbreviation, a synonym for yet, meaning you're eligible to. Okay?
Have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome, and may even need medical attention.
Now, this is why I tell you that I am a real alcoholic. Because right here in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, it is going to give you a description of the real alcoholic. And on several occasions, you are going to hear the reference to a real alcoholic. But this is the description of.
But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Now, I want to tell you that it's really strange that here in the description of the real alcoholic, that they would refer to Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was a novel that was written by Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson was a professed alcoholic. And he often referred to Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde as his autobiography. And you need to read this. It's less than 100 pages long, but I'm going to tell it to you here in a little story. That Dr. Jekyll had been full. He was a very handsome man, good looking, debonair, very polished. But he had been fooling around in his lab. And he came up with a serum that he could drink that had the ability to separate absolute good from absolute evil. And he would take this serum and he would become absolute evil. And when he would take the serum, he would become a hunchback and become very ugly, and he couldn't walk upright, and he became very foul, he stank, and he went around raping and pillaging and, just doing terrible, destructive things to people and property, and he was absolute evil. And Dr. Jekyll had control of this. And he came back to his lab, and he could become Dr. Jekyll, which was very handsome and very debonair and very polished to the T. And he would do this on occasion. Turn into Dr. Jekyll, and then he would go into Mr. Hyde. And Dr. Jekyll was invited to a celebration of sort, and he decided to go there. And while he was there, all polished up and being all debonair and handsome and good looking and everything, he looks down at his hands and he sees that there's hair starting to grow on his knuckles. And he's saying, "Oh no, Dr. Jekyll's coming out and I didn't take the drink yet." He had lost control now. He didn't know when Dr. Jekyll was coming out and when he wasn't. And here he was at this fancy thing, and so he had to leave because he knew Dr. Jekyll was coming out. Well, anyway, he was raping and pillaging and tearing up things, and finally somebody killed him. And they found out that Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll was the same person. But Robert Louis Stevenson had bought an island. And upon his retirement, he had people that would bring him food and booze and stuff like that to his island because he never wanted to come back to the United States again. And he lived there and died as an alcoholic. And so here in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, we're referring to the real alcoholic as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Isn't that peculiar?
He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world. Yet let him drink for a day, and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house, to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work.
Did you hear that? This is in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, that the real alcoholic does drugs. They start using a combination of high-powered sedatives with his booze so that he can go to work. And then we start using speed so we can go to work and be a little bit better at it. And then you have to have a few sedatives so you can go to sleep with your booze, so that the booze will put you to sleep. So, in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, it is telling you that the real alcoholic does do drugs. That does not make you a drug addict. What that makes you is an alcoholic, a real alcoholic. Okay.
Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums.
We call those treatment centers today.
This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary. But this description should identify him roughly.
Did anybody relate to anything in the description of the real alcoholic? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. If you ask him what...
You hear that? Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. And we have told you about the alcoholic with the allergy of the body, that we have a body that cannot handle alcohol well at all. They have an allergic reaction. And if that was all there was to it, it'd be fine and simple. Don't drink. But on top of this allergic body, we have a head. And this head is telling us we can't live without it. So we got an allergic body and a mental obsession of mind. And this is the main problem of the alcoholic. Is there anybody in here that has any allergies? Okay, you got allergies. What is it?
The phenomenon of cravings.
Huh?
The phenomenon of cravings.
Okay, but you got something else?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
break
I
out
call it-
handcuffs.
What?
I break out handcuffs.
Oh, okay. Okay, what kind of allergy you got? Environmental?
Like pollens.
Pollens, yeah, trees and grass and stuff like that. Now, what happens to you?
My eyes start running. I get itchy. My skin has a rash on it. I start sneezing.
I got the same thing, honey. I got the same thing. Now, has there ever been like a Saturday night that you were sitting home watching TV and, something comes on TV and you're just sitting there and thinking, boy, I sure could go for snorting some pollen. No, never crossed your mind. Okay. Well, see, now that's why. It's because you don't have the obsession of the mind. Okay? So this is why we're telling you the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Okay?
Why he started on that last bender. The chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count.
Now, let me tell you that with this obsession, there is the thought that somehow, some way, someday, they can beat the game. And sometimes we use drugs. And drugs allow us to drink like what we think normal people drink like. Not a drug addict, a real alcoholic. Okay? I think every alcoholic needs to get tattooed, put it on his forehead. Listen to this. All action is preceded by a thought. Whether it be a conscious thought that goes in the front door or subconscious thought that sneaks in the back door, all action is preceded by thought. Now, when I came to AA, I heard people talking about slips. You know, that they had a slip last night. And I was beginning to think that maybe they fell down or somebody poured a half gallon of black velvet down their throat. You know, because the slip, they always ended up drunk. And I found out that a slip is an acronym. A slip means sobriety loses its priority. That's what a slip is. Sobriety loses its priority. So when we have a slip, this means that sobriety has lost its priority. And when sobriety loses its priority, we drink. So that's what a slip is. Okay?
How true this is, few realize. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal. But everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected.
Squiggly writing. When I came to AA, they told me, you see squiggly writing, you're supposed to read it twice. It's very, very important.
The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink.
Powerful statement there. We are without defense against the first drink. And the first drink, it's always the engine that gets you. It ain't the caboose. You know, if you get run over by the train, you know, it's the engine that gets you. It ain't the caboose. And that's the same way with drinking. We are without defense against the first drink. One drink's too many, and 1,000 ain't enough.
The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, "It won't burn me this time, so here's how." Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth, pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, "For God's sake, how did I ever get started again?" Only to have that thought supplanted by, "Well, I'll stop with the sixth drink," or "What's the use anyhow?" When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop but cannot. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet.
That set of spiritual tools that's been laid at your feet is the 12 steps at Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have been told that in that toolkit, there's a wrench that will fit every nut in this room.
We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this, and nothing else, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe.
Now, this is where we are going to be talking about change. We're going to have to change, and it's going to have to be more than just your breath. We are going to have to change. It's telling us here to go to Appendix 2. Appendix 2 is on page 567. we got to change the tape here, so we're going to go ahead and go to page 567 tonight. Okay? And John Woniak is going to read page 567 for us. Appendix 2 was not in the first edition of the Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was that, because of that the doctor's opinion was page 1. But when the Appendix 2 was put into the book, the page numbers were changed. There was also another very large change that took place in the Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous, with the addition of Appendix 2. And you will see that in the 12th step. With the addition of Appendix 2, the 12th step was changed from having had a spiritual experience to having had a spiritual awakening. Today we know that 10% of our membership have what we call a spiritual experience. This happens to approximately 10% of our membership. A spiritual experience is what happened with Bill Wilson. Very sudden, very profound, very... Bill did not work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he had the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from the disease of alcoholism. Although, as we read in his story, Bill did work the 12 steps. Now, the spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening, we have to remember, is only good for 24 hours. Just like the promises. They're good for 24 hours. You know, if that be the case, if I got the promises of the 9th step when I worked the 9th step, guess what, honey? I'm out of here. You know, that's all I ever wanted. I'd never be back. But everything that AA promises us is only for 24 hours. And if you want to keep them, you're going to do tomorrow the same thing you did for today to get those promises, to get all of the rewards, to get everything that you're getting today, that peace of mind and serenity and tranquility and that ability to be comfortable living in your own skin. You like that? And you're going to keep on doing what you did today, the next day, and the next day, and the next day. But there's no promises on this thing. Because you see, at midnight, the bet's off. And that's just how it is. So 90% of our membership has a spiritual awakening. And this is where we change as we learn. A very slow, gradual process of changing that other people will notice in us before we even notice it in us. You know, people will say to you, "You look like you're changing. What got over you? There's something different about you." And you don't know what it is they're talking about. But they are seeing the spiritual awakening, which is that change sufficient to bring about recovery from the disease of alcoholism. And we get that through working the 12 steps into our life. Okay, now John is going to read this, and I don't have a button over there to push John to turn him on, turn him off, but I can talk louder than him. Okay, go ahead, John.
Spiritual experience. The term spiritual experience
Which is Satan,
and spiritual awakening
which is educational,
are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms.
Okay, John, right there. Now, in the doctor's opinion, it tells us that the alcoholic, when he is not drinking, is restless, irritable, and discontent, filled with guilt, shame, remorse, self-pity, and fear. That's what we're like when we are not drinking. And this personality change can happen through putting the 12 steps into our life to where I'm not drinking and I'm comfortable. And I feel good, and I feel serene, and I feel happy, and I feel peace of mind, and I'm comfortable living in my own skin. And what brought that about? But the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. The personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from the disease of alcoholism. Go ahead.
Yet it is true that our first printing made many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous, which means false. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described.
Now the first chapter in the book was Bill's story. Can you imagine the first people that got sober and they read the first chapter and say, oh, hell, that never happened to me. I'm screwed. This thing will never work for me because it never happened to me. So thank God we found out that doesn't have to happen for everyone. That 90% of our membership that doesn't happen to. Okay, go ahead.
Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate, overwhelming God consciousness, followed once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Among our rapidly growing membership of, we'll say, millions today, of such alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety.
You change as you learn.
Because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, the friends of a newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration
change
in his reaction to life, and that such a change could hardly have been brought about himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have accomplished by years of self-discipline.
Step right there. So what happens is by coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, that we change back to what God intended us to be all along. And you know how that happens? I think it's my idea. Yeah, I think this was my idea. No, this is what God wanted for me all along. But it went full circle. And I'm changing back to what God intended me to be all along. Huh? Is that odd or is that God?
The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives.
I'm sorry, John. Wrong button.
With few exceptions, our members find they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource that presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than themselves is the essence of a spiritual experience. Our more religious member calls it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problem in the light of our experience can recover.
Stop right there. Are you hearing what this book is saying? Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of being honest with himself, faced with his problems in light of his experience, can recover. And he's going to throw in one little tiny stipulation here. One little tiny stipulation.
Provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts.
There it is. Provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts.
He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable.
All right there they are. The how. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. These are essential, and these are indispensable. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And here we have a quote from our book, tells us it's Herbert Spencer. We don't know if it was Herbert Spencer. We got people that are arguing about it. I don't know who said it, but I like it. Because again, it's telling us that there is a principle. Go ahead, John.
There is a principle in which a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation.
Contempt. Thinking you already know what the answer is and your mind snaps shut. Contempt prior to investigation. There is a principle. It's a bar against all information that has the ability to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation. Knowing what the answer is before the question's ever asked. You will never learn more than you already know. And we have to remember that us and our best thinking got us seats in the meeting rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So just how smart are you, huh? So just maybe we could listen to someone else. Just maybe. Remain teachable. To define contempt as an attitude towards something which one despises as worthless, insignificant, or vile. Total disregard. I told you the 12th step was changed. And this here is the only change that took place in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous since it was written in 1939. So just maybe what's in this book. It worked for drunks back then, and just maybe we got over 3 million sober alcoholics today. Just maybe it might work for you. Just maybe. So, we are going to go back to page 25 and go down to the next paragraph. And that's going to be the end of the tape. So you guys can change it next week, John. John. Okay? I've run it so it's not going to be in the right place.
In a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end.
Okay, two alternatives.
Blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could.
Step one.
And the other, to accept spiritual help.
Step two. All right. So this is not a multiple choice question. This is where you are in that shit or get off the pot situation. You want to stay in step one, or you going to go on to step two? Real simple. No multiple choice here. No multiple choice. One or the other. I thought we was going to... All right, we're going to go on...
This we did because we honestly wanted to, and were willing to make the effort.
Okay, we're going to stop right there. We'll get into a certain American businessman next week. I thought that was where we was going to change tapes, but I guess we're not. So that's where we're at for next week. And so with no more from me, I'm going to turn it over to our chairperson, Cookie.
Tonight, I'd like you to comment or ask any questions you may have at this time. We ask that you keep your comments brief, in 2 minutes, as to be respectful for others. If you have a problem, please feel free to share it with another after the meeting. I would like to open the floor for comments and questions at this time.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm definitely alcoholic.
Hi, Stacy.
So I learned in rehab years ago about the disease of alcoholism, which was established in 1956. But it made a lot of sense to me what was going on in our brains. We have a midbrain that is not conscious. It acts on its own. It has 3 functions. We eat, we reproduce, and we have fear or flight. It acts on its own. We have nothing to do with it. When we put drink in our body, it hijacks all of those, and it becomes number 1 in our brain. So that's what's the change that happens. I don't know all the medical jargon. But then in the frontal cortex up here in the front part of our brain is where we get to make decisions. And when we drink or use, all of that is numb. And so our midbrain takes over. And that's why that phenomenon comes out. And why we choose to drink, even when people say, why can't you just stop? Can't you put it down? It's no longer a choice because our consciousness is taken over. And that made a lot of sense to me because I could never figure it out. And ironically, the only thing that can quiet that unconscious midbrain is a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. And another irony is Carl Jung. I think he was a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he was with Roland. I believe he treated Roland H. I think.
Yeah, Roland
And
Hazard.
he told him the second time around in his treatment that probably the only thing that was going to help him was some kind of spirituality. And so they've proven now medically that this is a disease and spirituality is the only real answer to the problem itself. That there's no medicine or pill that we can take to quiet that down. I thought that was interesting. And the
Yes.
other thing is in AA, that triangle, that's a delta symbol for change. So it kind of dovetails into what we
Okay.
talked about tonight. I pass.
Okay, thank you.
Amber Alcoholic.
Hey, Amber.
What I heard in a meeting this morning, from an old timer, or a long timer, sorry, that really hit a note for me, and she was like, sobriety is a blessing and recovery is a responsibility. And then I seen this saying the other, like, a couple of weeks ago, and it just keeps going off in my head, and it helped me. But it says, people say seeing is believing. However, I'm here to let you know believing is seeing.
I'm Lindsay, I'm an alcoholic. I wish the spiritual experience was like in the front of the book, that appendix part, because when I first started coming to AA, I was just like, I saw the God stuff scared me out. And I really never came back it probably kept me out for like 6 or 7 years. And I worked the steps before, and that really like grew me spiritually, and I really do have a God in my understanding today, and it's just like, it's so cool, now it's like, I'm not even a fan of the Lord's Prayer, but I'm open-minded enough to do it anyway, and so like, the steps really is what gave me my God today as well.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I'm Bob Baser, alcoholic.
Hi,
I'd
Bob.
like to expand a little bit on Ruthie's slip. Sobriety loses its place. Well, just where does sobriety fit into your life? In my life, God is number one. If I don't have God, I'm not going to have sobriety. So sobriety is number two. Sobriety, then my family, and everything else in my life. So if I don't have God, I don't have sobriety. If I don't have sobriety, I'm not going to have anything else. I've already proven it. So that's what she was talking about when she says loses its place. Sobriety has to be the second rung of your life.